All right, so the next one we're going to roll into are the comprehensive cases. And the first one we have is Miss Nancy here. And she came in, we were treating her son, and typical thing, they start to see the progress and the change in their kids' treatment, and so they start asking about themselves because they know that they need work too, but they've just been putting it off. But just by coming into the office, it made them less, I don't want to say fearful, but it just allowed them to want to jump into it a lot easier. So she said she wanted to move forward. Braces were off the table. So we decided that we could do aligners. This is her composite. And you can see, those upper 2 to 2, there's a lot of crossover and a lot of overlap between those teeth. And the same thing in the lower, just a lot of overlap and a lot of crowding. The good thing she had going for her was her bite was in a pretty good spot. And bite is a little deep, overgen is a little excessive. But the main thing that brought her in was the upper and lower crowding, specifically the upper. She said she didn't like how the light shines differently on those teeth when she smiles. And if you, understand how teeth absorb light, you can understand exactly what she's talking about, because it can be the same tooth with the same density, but when they're crowded or rotated, the light hits it differently, and it kind of changes the look of the smile. So that was her main issue. And then this is again just the 3D setup of her initial malocclusion, how she came to the office. And so treatment plan, again, just align everything in the upper and lower, IPR the lower as needed, class 2 elastics is needed, just to kind of line things up and finish her on up. This is her Pan and Seth. Again, nothing remarkable. She has her wisdom teeth in. My philosophy on wisdom teeth is, if they're in and not causing any issues, or if they're not in but they are pretty dormant, I just leave them. If they start to come in, or if they start to cause pain, it's nothing for me to go ahead and send the referral at that point. But hers were in a pretty decent spot and they weren't causing any issues. So we decided to leave them alone for now. Okay, so here's her initial setup. And again, one of the biggest things you want to do is just make sure you have enough space around these teeth before you start lining them up. And so this is from the occlusal. So I did some nice expansion. Again, staged everything out. So I expanded in that upper first. So I didn't really rotate that upper left one until I got some space. And then we rotated it in to line it up with the rest of the teeth. Same thing down here in the lower. We're going to create some space first. And then start unraveling the rest of the teeth. And so that's the biggest part of it. So right here at number 7 is where, I just kind of expanded everything. So I haven't really started working on rotating these teeth out yet. The main thing is I want to go in here and create space in between those teeth before we start rotating. So that's pretty much what we have here. So after the space was created, now you can start to see all of the space that I've created. I think that's what I'm trying to show here. Yeah, so you can see how in between those teeth we have some space, and then we start to unravel. And so this is the part about the staging that I talked about that is super important, because you can have the best final tooth position, but if the path to get there is not executed properly, you won't get there. And again, my typical setup, the laterals, I added one to that central because it was looking a little wonky, and 6 5 4s on the lower, 2 4s and 6 in the upper, even though I left it off the 4 on that side, mainly because we just didn't need it. And so the first set was 23 aligners up top and 21 aligners at the bottom. And this is one of the things that I started looking at after the fact, is if you click on this little icon over to the left, it will show you where you have collisions. And so the thing that I started doing was, after I do the setup and I have my final tooth position, I click on that to see, if I have any overlap with any of the contacts. And as you can see in the upper 2 to 2, specifically between the upper ones and the upper left 1 and 2, there's a lot of collisions going on there. 0.5 millimeters of overlap is pretty substantial. And that will kind of show its rear end in a second. So this is where she was at the refinement. So you can look at the lower arch, and that was nice. And if you, again, just go back here, you can see we're like -1 down in the lower arch, but then you look up top, we're at -0.5 of the overlap, and you can see how differently the cases turned out. So the right side, lined up a little bit in the upper arch, but that upper left 1, that upper left 2 did not get where it needed to go at all. And mainly it was because I was not cognizant of the collisions that I had there. Another thing, and this is what I always, if you ever heard me speak, I always talk about this, and I'll say this in every presentation, it's so important to take pictures of the patients with their aligners in. So when they come in, when it's time to make a decision if you're going to be done or if you need a refinement, go ahead and pop that last aligner in, because that will give you a lot of information in terms of what went wrong or what went right throughout your setup. And so if you look over here, that bottom is where her teeth were supposed to be, but clearly they're not there. And so there's about a 2.5 millimeter gap between the aligners and the tooth. And again, I think most of that, I know the majority of that is because I didn't do a good job of creating enough space between those teeth before rotating them. Okay, so we're going to go back in for her refinement, and her bite was starting to get a little class 2-ish. So I decided, to add some buttons to the upper 3s, lower 6s for class 2 elastics. And again, I'm just going to go in and kind of get that lined up. And I did a little overcorrection. So I brought the mesial in a little bit more than I would like to, the mesial out on the upper left 2 more than I would like to, just again to try to overcorrect things. And then the same thing on the right lateral, just to rotate that out a little bit better. And then at this point here, we're just kind of tidying up things in the lower arch. And like I said, we were in a pretty good spot already. But I just wanted to go in and dial things in a little bit better. And again, just do some class 2 elastics just to kind of settle her bite in a little bit more. So that was the setup. This is when she came in. We added the clear buttons on the upper 3s with button cutouts, and then the precision buttons on the lower 6s. I like those because they have a big surface area. And so they, I have low breakage with it because I just have more anatomy to button interface. And the good thing about using uLab, they'll give you these pop-ups about, buttons too close to this, yada, 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 yada. But the great thing about it is you can set it up wherever you want. And so you can see I still have the attachments on the distal half of the lower 6s, but I had enough room to put the buttons on and just quarter medium elastics to get us going. All right, so this is where she was at the second refinement. I liked what she did with the elastics. The bite is a lot better now. Upper 2 to 2 is still not quite where it needed to be. And then the other thing is, if you look at the lower incisors, they're now rotated and a little more crowded than they were after that first alignment. And so this is the scan of their teeth. Again, we had some nice alignment down there, and this is how she came back. And so she had a little family issue going on that I felt so bad for her. It was with her young son, not the one that we were treating, but she lost him, and it was a sad time in her life, and aligners were the last thing on her mind at the time. And so I totally understood that. It wasn't a big deal. And so at this point though, it's like, okay, well, let's get her out. Let's give her the smile that she wants. Lining these lower incisors were not a big deal. I just needed a new game plan for this upper 2 to 2 so I can go ahead and drive it home. So I decided to take off that attachment that was on the upper left 1 and add these inverted little beveled attachments on the 1 and 2, just to give me some good anchor points to extrude and rotate these teeth to get them where I needed to. So you can see the discrepancy between the incisal edges of the upper and lower ones, and also the alignment that we lost in that time period for her. So again, the lower is not a huge concern for me. It was mainly the upper. So I put a little pressure point on the mesial lingual half of that upper left 2. and we just kind of line everything up. And so rotating it out and extruding it at the same time is what I did for that upper incisor. Again, just looking at it from the occlusal, create a little more space between it. It's kind of hard to tell from that angle, but I create a little more space so that I can have room to extrude and rotate that tooth at the same time. And then in the lower arch, again, just cleaning things up, just lining it up like we need to. Nothing special going on in the lower arch. Okay, and so that's the setup. And you can see the precision buttons are still on, and the upper buttons as well. So we just added those two additional attachments. And so, looking at the setup, the upper left one, I added some extra extrusion. One, because I want to make sure I get there. Two, because she had this weird shape anatomy that I knew I was going to contour, and I'm not going to take that whole portion off that mesial incisal edge, but I am going to, contour it a little bit to make it look a little bit better. So I wanted to go a little bit further incisally than the upper right one to accommodate that. Also, you can see that there's space between the upper ones, to make sure that I had enough clearance and I didn't have any collisions. And then two, bigger attachments just to give the aligners a little more grip. And if you look at the position and the angle of those attachments, it goes against what the majority of us were taught with clear aligners. We were taught to flip it the other way and allow the aligners to have a big push surface to extrude those teeth and push it down. I like to use it the other way to create a ledge. And to me, that just gives a better handle on the tooth to bring that tooth down. And this is kind of what I'm explaining with this picture here. So if you look from the side, instead of the bevel facing gingival, it's facing the incisal edge. And I just have this kind of a ledge that's there. And the way I look at it is I want this teeth to be displaced more incisally. So when I do the setup, what the aligner is going to look like is as I progress through, the incisal edge is going to be more incisal as I progress through the aligners. Now, if I didn't have an attachment on it, there would be nothing to grab. The aligner would just start moving incisally, but the tooth wouldn't move with it. And in a very, very simplistic way of explaining it, giving that aligner a ledge to just pull on as it's deforming to move incisally, it just gives it an anchor point to pull the tooth into the aligner. Plain and simple. And this is different than, this force-driven system that's often talked about with some of the other companies. And it's not to say that that doesn't work. It's just that, there's other ways to get there. And so essentially the way they'll do it is they will set up an interaction between the attachment and the aligner such that it may not look like it fits, but that's because they're anticipating when you insert the aligner, it's going to put a certain force vector to push that tooth by the attachment into the aligner. Again, I'm not saying that it doesn't work, but with uDesign, it's more of a displacement, which is a very simplistic way of looking at it. The tooth needs to go 2 millimeters anteriorly. Each aligner moving progressively through is going to essentially get you 2 millimeters anteriorly. So a very simplistic way of doing it. And the way I look at the attachments is they're just handles. I think a lot of attention goes into them. And I think they are important, but I think the most important part about the whole thing is the setup and more importantly, the staging. And one of the things I like to talk about is when I look at this case here that I treated with a commercial lab, commercial aligner company some years ago, that's a pretty large space that we had to close, right? And then, not much going on in the lower arch, but this is the setup. And so outside of the upper ones, if you look at about 80 to 90% of the attachments are conventional attachments, just nice handles on the teeth so that I can get the movements that I needed to get out. Here's another example, treated with a different aligner company years ago. And, some crowding up top, a lot of crowding in the lower, some IPR was done to align everything. But look at his attachments, conventional. So, I'm not using all of these, optimized attachments and, this force-driven system. Again, I'm not saying it doesn't work. So I want to be clear about that. But again, a lot of this stuff can be broken down in very simplistic manners in doing it. And then one more just to show it off. And so, you talk about torque, you talk about expansion, you talk about, align and everything. I mean, look at the upper ones. If that's not the classic class 2 div 2, low torque upper incisors with a deep bite, constricted arches, a lot of crowding going on. And we were able to unravel all of that with just aligners. But look at the attachments, all conventional. And so that is one of the things where I think sometimes we get caught up in things being I don't want to say overly complicated, but talked about in such as what I'll call a high level way. But if you just simplify things and break things down and you have a great setup, you have attachments that are just going to keep the anatomy of the teeth and the aligner intimately touched, you're going to get where you need to be. And you don't need all these force-driven systems and all these special attachments and all this other stuff that's out there. You just need a great setup and some anchors to hold the aligners to carry it out. Okay, so I'll get off my soapbox. But anyway, long story short, this is how she finished. So we were able to finally get the upper 2 to 2 align. We were able to get that upper left 1 extruded down to line up like we needed it to. Her lower incisors were back, straightened, and her bite is in a good spot. So we were able to get where we needed to go. This is her final 3D X-ray representations. And again, if you just look at the overjet and the alignment that was corrected with the aligners, I think that was pretty significant amount of work. And I think she did a great job with the aligners, with the elastics, which really helped us out a lot. And then this is her traditional Panacef that we're used to looking at. And again, nothing significant. Got her wisdom teeth out, and everything just coincides like it's supposed to. Okay, and then this is her rundown. 23 for the upper, 21 in the lower. We use tagless 10-day changes. For the second, refinement, we use tagless 10-day changes. It was 12 in the upper, 6 in the lower. And the final one was 12 upper and lower aligners. We used Endura, and we were changing weekly. So the total treatment time was 19 months, but it was actually 16. But she disappeared during that time period. When she had the family emergency. And not only did we not see her during that time period, but because she didn't wear the aligners, we kind of relapsed back a little bit and lost some time there. But nonetheless, we were able to get where we needed to go. And she was extremely thrilled about the outcome, as was I.